KOWS 107.3 FM in Occidental, California. On the telephone from Brooksville, Maine, we have Rob Shetterly. Good afternoon.
Hi, Ken. How are you?
I'm good. You know, I'm better now that I'm back at the board here and you're on the phone. I need all the help I can get.
I won't ask why.
Well, you know, I'm feeling a little. You don't have to. I'll tell you.
Okay.
I'm feeling low lately about our beloved country and our beloved world. It just seems that we still haven't really gotten it yet. But now we're back on the air and ready to hopefully allow our listeners to enjoy some good conversation here.
Well, thanks. You know, I commiserate with you, and I think that anyone who hasn't felt low or hasn't felt angry and outraged, isn't concentrating on what's really happening. I mean, it's an entirely appropriate response. The question is, then what? And that's where we are. I think is understanding. I mean, they looking at the way the country's being run, the situation with the whole host of the panoply of issues that are out there, and how every one of them is not being addressed the way it should be for the survival of our species on the planet and for anything resembling justice. We should be depressed. And the way out of that, of course, is more action.
Right. That's what has me low, is that everywhere I look, I don't think people are depressed enough. I don't think people are angry enough. I see an awful lot of, at this late date, with all we know now, I still see a tremendous amount of distracted, people not really paying the kind of attention that we really need now.
Well, that's certainly true, and I think a lot of it has to do with the economic situation and the degree of fear that we are constantly being fed. For instance, you do see some anger, and especially in a group like the Tea Party, but that's a very manipulated anger, and it's counterproductive, not only to themselves for the most part, but certainly to the welfare of the country and all the important issues. So, there's an organized anger which is misled. What we don't see, unfortunately, is enough anger and enough action from people who are really trying to solve these problems, and that's I guess one of the sources of what's so distressing. I think one of the things about here we are on Labor Day, and one of the major institutions in this country that is often the source of dissent and action are the labor unions. And the labor unions, of course, have been so curtailed, so emasculated, and so co-opted that it's hard to expect them to, mount any real dissent. I mean, they are fighting for the same jobs that lots of other people are. They're being paid the same low wages now, and they're dependent on many jobs that come from the military-industrial complex. And so they don't really want the policies changed that would affect their lives for the better. So we are in this very difficult position where there isn't enough anger from people who really want to, see the reality of the issues. I say that in all humility. It's not like I know the truth about a lot of things, but I can certainly see some things and how they're being distorted in our government and in our major media, and the fact that they're not being handled. So I think that's but then there is something like the events that have taken place in Washington for the last 2.5 weeks. There's a huge set of demonstrations against the Keystone XL pipeline coming out of the tar sands, going to Texas, and this big fear now that Obama's going to okay that pipeline, and the State Department already has. We know that huge crisis for the environment and climate change if it is okayed. And well over 1,000 people, maybe 1,300 people, have been arrested now. It didn't make much of a blip in the major media, but it was in a major event, and there are going to be several more events like this happening in Washington. I'm going to be there in the one in October, when it starts October 6th, where people are going to be arrested in waves, day after day after day, on the sort of Arab Spring model about our wars. So that's the kind of action we need to see. And unfortunately, you say you don't see it, but a lot of it actually happens. It's just that our media doesn't report it.
Mm-hmm. Right. If a tree falls in the forest.
Exactly. You've got to make a lot of noise before it gets picked up by the remote receivers.
For our listeners, Rob Shetterly is a portrait artist. He is a writer and a teacher, and is most known for a stunning set of something like 150 now portraits of the series is called Americans Who Tell the Truth. And Rob was with us about a year and a half ago in April of 2010. I had the pleasure of listening to our previous interview last night, and was quite warmed by it, and particularly struck by how 18 months ago seemed like such an innocent time way back then. And just the trajectory of how this drama is unfolding is just as it puts a knot in my stomach. And anyway, welcome back to the show. The show has grown enormously since you were on 17 months ago, I'm happy to say, and we're starting our third season today. And how's things in Brooksville?
Well, actually, they're pretty good. We sort of dodged Irene a little bit. We got a lot of wind and rain, but nothing too serious right here. Nothing like western Maine or New Hampshire, or upstate Vermont, or some of New York. And we're having a lovely day, although it was again forecast rain, but it's a little bit sunny. But I wanted to, this portrait series of mine, I'd like to say a few words about it, because, in fact, I'm working on portrait number 170 right now. You remember my goal was 50 portraits, which I never thought I'd make, but it is really thrilling to me to do as much traveling as I do now around this country and meet the people I do, and meet people everywhere who are working so hard for all the social, environmental, economic issues that will make this country more honest. And there are lots of them out there. They are not well organized enough, and a lot of them feel that they are isolated and not aware of other people's work, and that's part of the job that I do, is trying to connect people and make them aware of wonderful role models, especially children. And I've, each group of new portraits that I paint, and I'd like to talk about a couple of them, bring me to kind of new understandings, I think, about why we're in this situation, and then some possible ways out of it. For instance, I've got a big show right here in Maine right now of many of the portraits that I've painted around environmental issues. And about a year ago this time, I had an opportunity to go to Syracuse twice. And on my second trip there, I spent time with Oren Lyons. Are you familiar with him, Kim?
Yes, sir.
Ken?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Has he ever been on your program?
No, I've approached him and I have not succeeded. I became aware of him through the film The 11th Hour.
Yeah. Well, he's now 80 years old. He's the faithkeeper, the chief of the Onondaga Nation, a nation of Native Americans which has resisted many of the things that a lot of tribes in this country have resorted to in order to survive economically. The casinos and this and that. And instead, they're trying to live by their traditional values under his leadership. And the quote that I put on his paintings, and a lot of your listeners who've maybe either seen these portraits or heard me talk before would know that they're not just a portrait. There's also a quote from each person scratched into the surface. And the quote that I put on Oren's painting is, "The law says, if you poison the water, you'll die. The law says that if you poison the air, you'll suffer. The law says if you degrade where you live, you'll suffer. If you don't learn that, you can only suffer. There is no discussion with this law." One of the things, that sounds, pretty absolute, and it is. And one of the things that to me is so important about that, the message that it should send to lots and lots of people, is that in these times we are told, just barraged daily from every source, that the reality of our lives is economy. It's jobs, it's money, it's profits, it's markets, it's growth. And what Oren Lyons is saying, and what many sensible people say who understand where we live, in this little speck in the cosmos, that the reality of our lives is not fundamentally our economy, it's our relationship to nature. And if we don't, readjust our lives to try to be in harmony with nature, we could not possibly survive here. And that, is a very absolute and tough message, but I think it's the one that we all need to pay attention to. And so when there's all this talk, as Obama's giving a speech in Detroit today about, jobs and Labor Day and celebrating workers and all that stuff, and trying to bring back jobs, there are lots of flaws in what's being proposed, but the primary one is that we're trying to revive an economy that was killing us, killing all of us, killing the other species of the planet, killing the planet. There is an economy, developed by people like David Korten, that is in harmony with nature, that is sustainable, that builds more jobs, that builds economic and social justice. And it's that economy which is the one we ought to be building, not one that's reliant on progress and continual growth, which is impossible in a natural system, and also relies on war. It's the only way to peace is to come, to build an economy that's in harmony with nature. And one of the other people that I had a great pleasure to meet after I'd been in Syracuse, I went to Ithaca and spent a day with Sandra Steingraber. Are you familiar with her?
I'm not.
Oh, well, if there's a contemporary Rachel Carson, Sandra Steingraber is certainly it, and I would recommend to you to get in touch with her at some point and have her on your program. She is a scholar in residence at Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York, sort of a similar arrangement to Bill McKibben and Middlebury, where he's not really on the faculty but is in residence and is able to go and come and do his writing and do his activism. And she is now in her early 50s. She grew up in the middle of Iowa in a industrial, both sort of in manufacturing and industrial farming area, an area that had a huge load in both its air and water and in the land of synthetic chemicals. She developed cancer at the age of 19 and started studying the effects of environmental toxins and the health effects on people. And her first book was called Living Downstream, in the sense all of us in the world now live downstream of the chemical contaminants and the effect that it's having on all of us. And she's a wonderful writer. She's funny. She's a great scientist. And these books that she's written, the latest being a book about how toxins in the environment are feeding the epidemic of learning disabilities in children. Mm-hmm. These aren't just something we're able to measure today or something caused by aspects of our cultural life that's beyond outside of the sort of the chemical makeup. That one of the real important aspects of why there's this epidemic of these problems with kids is all the toxins that are in them, and she traces the different toxins to particular conditions. wonderful woman. I was lucky to be invited into a school, and I was only going to be there for one day, and so I'd invited her to come to the school, and we met there in front of the students. It was a really wonderful way to meet a new subject of one of my portraits, where she came into the school. You know, I explained to the kids what I was doing, and then presented to them Sandra Steingraber as my next portrait, and let her talk about her work. And she stayed all day long and talked to 7 classes with me about her work. And let me just read.
How old were these kids?
This was a middle and high school, so they had all, previous to my coming there, they had I think 10 of my portraits in the school for a month, and all the kids in the upper grades had picked a truth teller of their own and written a report about why that person meant something to them that's important about how to live their own lives. And so, you know, after I'd done presenting, then they presented, and they also made pictures and had quotes and presented the reasons for doing what they do. That's one of the things that I do in schools is not just come and talk, but get kids to engage and look for the values that move them, inspire them to greater citizenship and compassionate work in the world, and then present those people to me so that there's a give and take. And then we also invite in the parents and the community, so it can be done, for the whole community. So it's not just between me and the students, but they get to actually show their own parents some of the things that they care about and who their role models are. It's very moving.
Yeah, I know that this may be the work that you do as a teacher, when all is said and done, may be the most important element of your work.
Well, I'm sure it is, and because it's just that I'm able to, because of the portraits, get into a lot of places and a lot of schools, colleges, and talk about people. And we now, my organization, Americans Who Tell the Truth, has partnered with a whole host of other organizations, educational groups around the country, like Bill Bigelow's group, Rethinking Schools, the Zin Ed Project, with Yes Magazine, with John Cooksey's How to Boil a Frog about climate change, another organization called Operation Breaking Stereotypes, one called the My Hero Project, and it just goes on and on. We're all sharing curriculum now, and I help to illustrate their curriculum, and they give us ideas for building ours, and it's a lot of interactive stuff going on around education. It's just to try to get it in mainstreamed in the schools is the tricky part now.
I want to encourage our listeners to check out your websites. Certainly to take a look at the portraits, to get a feel for not only the direct. I think you've referred to these as a form of didactic art.
I have, yeah. It was just something I never thought I'd be doing. They are didactic, but they don't. I mean, I hope that it's not just saying, this is it, period. I mean, what they are is an attempt to open a dialogue about ideas and how to act in a democracy, what it means to be a citizen. And I don't expect, everyone to look at what I'm doing, the people I've chosen, the quotes I've chosen, and agree with everything I've said. I mean, that would be crazy. What I do think is that every person I've painted and every quote I've chosen has a lot of thinking and integrity behind it. It doesn't fit with everybody's life, but it's certainly a well to draw something from in terms of discussion and thought about where we are in the world and how we got here and where we're going and how to get there. So that's become the. I mean, I often say to groups that so I get challenged frequently about some of the people I've painted and why I painted them and why anybody else should agree with me. And I stress that this is a very subjective project, that these are all my choices. And, there's nothing to stop anybody from painting their own set of portraits and
That's right.
doing a similar kind of thing. But I think I wouldn't be traveling around and getting to talk in schools and with kids and adults unless there was some resonance among lots of other people.
Absolutely. More than some, they're very resonant, each and cumulatively even multiplied many times over. You're introducing us to people you admire, and you're saying these are people worthy of our attention, and we get to see their faces and hear them speak a few pungent lines, and bingo, we're introduced.
Well, it's and it's the same process I try to give to other people as the one I've afforded myself. I of those 170 portraits, my guess is I should go through and count it, but I bet at least 100 of them were people when I started this nearly 10 years ago I had never heard of, and so I'm meeting these folks. Mm-hmm. I'm being hugely impressed and inspired by who they are and their courage and persistence, and then just thrilled to go out and be in the classrooms and introduce them to other people and tell their stories. I mean, I really am a storyteller. For instance, are you familiar with Tim DeChristopher?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I went back in June. His first sentencing hearing was supposed to be in middle of June, or June 23rd, something like that. And I was thinking that I wanted to meet him and paint his portrait before, at least meet him and be prepared to paint his portrait before he was put in jail, because I thought maybe I wouldn't have access to him now. Then, for some of you listeners who may not know, he's the young man who, when he was just 26 years old, went into an oil and gas lease auction in Salt Lake, and not knowing what he was going to do, but thinking he was going to disrupt it in some way because he was so appalled about these very fragile lands near Arches National Park in southern Utah being auctioned off to the oil and gas companies for practically nothing, and potentially destroyed, that he thought he had to do something, and he got in there and then got this idea of actually bidding, because nobody had challenged his presence or his right to be in the auction or bid, and he ended up spending $1.8 million and buying 22,000 acres of land before they realized that he had no money and he was a fraud, and he was disrupting, and driving up the prices, and the whole auction came to a halt. Was eventually found to had a lot of technical illegalities anyway. He had actually, and this land was taken off the market, at least so far, and then he was charged with fraud, indicted and tried and sentenced now to 2 years in jail. An amazingly courageous young man who's become a great leader, even from jail, of his organization, Peaceful Uprising. So I went out there to Salt Lake to meet him. I never met him, just emailed with him, and what a thrill! And then to be able to, work really hard in his portrait, have it done before he actually gets sentenced. It was on July 26th when he was sentenced to 2 years. Have the portrait done, send copies of it out to Peaceful Uprising so that they can make cards and posters and use it to raise money for the defense. Beautiful. But also then to go into schools and present the portrait and tell this story and explain why it's a role model for all of us, to need to think about acting in this kind of manner of civil disobedience in order to protect our most important resources.
Yeah. It's one thing to read about him in the newspaper, but it's another thing entirely to get to see his face, and to I remember reading the speech he gave to the court when he was sentenced. Absolutely, and that, by the way, is there's a link to it on my website underneath his portrait, because you think of courtroom speeches, and one of the famous ones in this country, or people who are aware of things like that, is Eugene Debs, speaking in, I think it was 1918, when he was convicted of, using his free speech to try to encourage
the United States not to go to war in World War I. Spent what he was sentenced at 10 years. Ran for president from jail in the Socialist Party. But Debs' speech after his conviction was one of the real great courtroom speeches of justification. You would think that judges and prosecutors who hear a man talk like that would be so shamed that they would resign. But and de Christopher's was like that too. A brilliant speech that certainly put to shame the pretext that was used to put this young man in jail for 2 years.
Right. Yes, please, anyone listening to this, please read de Christopher's speech at his sentencing. It gives us strength, frankly, and we need all we can get, of course. And, he's charged with fraud, he's charged with disruption, and really all it is shining a light into a very dark fraud of its own.
A much bigger one. I mean, all the people who are doing, the most egregious damage to our culture and to the world are, whether it's in the banking industry or mortgages or the environment or in the wars, and the people who tell the truth and try to stop them from these crimes are the ones who are being held accountable. None of the real criminals are being held accountable, and that's when you look at a society that claims to be a democracy and you start measuring, I think, how that one can determine whether you actually have that thing called democracy. It would be hard to find a gauge that we are actually living up to in this country. And certainly accountability is one that, you can't have a country based on the rule of law and that all the biggest lawbreakers, whether they're the people who lie about war or the people who deregulate our environmental regulations or, whatever they do, none of them are being held to account. And this is just that in itself is a good measure of where we are. And then, of course, the question you have to ask is, well, why is that in a so-called democracy, in a country ruled by law that they're allowed to get away with it? And then, the answer to that question is the toughest nut of all. It's all about the rule of the amount of power that is accrued to wealth and how they can then break any laws they want or rewrite the law to suit themselves.
It's our dereliction.
Exactly. It becomes, there are obviously two great sources of power. And the one is wealth, and the other is people. And when you say our dereliction, it's us as people. When you go back to what you said at the beginning about us not being organized enough as people and angry enough to be out in the streets and doing what we need to do to protect our own futures and our own children and the place where we live, that's true. But the power is there. It's just a question of whether we're willing and courageous enough to take it. That's a big challenge of our day, I think.
It's a daunting task, but there really is no good option. I think most folks, myself included, the prospect of really letting all this in and really taking it on is it's like the last thing we want to do, and yet when we begin to do it, it actually dispels a lot of the fear and the depression. And it empowers us.
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, when you're working together with other people for an idealistic goal, there's great joy in that. One of the things that we don't want to give away as we work for whatever kind of justice we think we're working for is our joy in life. And a lot of it, because otherwise we'll lose our humanity. And we don't want to be angry, outraged, bitter people, fighting for scraps of justice. Instead, we want to be communities working together with great love and compassion and joy about what we're doing, because and there is, as soon as you work together, like you just said, Ken, as soon as you're doing that, you feel this camaraderie and this excitement about the task. And that in itself, just that process, of course, like so many good things, the process is the thing itself. That process is what really builds the community which we are, trying to establish anyway.
Yeah. I'm concerned with how deep the rot is, and how deeply our country has been disgraced, sold out. It makes it so much harder for us to love our country when we look upon it and see this kind of, frankly, degenerate behavior. And so much of the work, has to take place inside ourselves, inside our own conscience, and to find courage individually to look out for other people who are essentially aware that that we're walking a very fine line here, and that we really can't afford to turn away, even though that's what we most might want to do.
Well, that's true. But I think I'm kind of interested in what you said about the difficulty, because the depth of the rot and the difficulty of loving the country. I don't have any difficulty in still being inspired by and loving the ideals of the country. I certainly don't respect and love our current crop of leaders, or any we've had for a long time, or the hypocrisy of this country and the distress it causes the rest of the world. One doesn't have to, reach deep to find any love for that, and you shouldn't. We should be. I think one of our biggest tasks now is identifying ourselves as citizens of the world, not as looking to feel any particular nationalistic pride. That's one of the problems in the world is nationalism, I think. But caring about those ideals is so important. I was in a college one time, and I think it was last year or the year before, in Iowa, and it was a Catholic college, and the president was an ex-nun, a very serious and good woman, and she invited me to a private lunch just with her, and she said to me, she looked at me, I just met practically, and thanked me for coming to her college, and I thanked her for inviting me there and the opportunity to be with her faculty and students. And she said, the difference between us is, she said, I'm a realist and you're an idealist. And I was kind of thrown, here was this Catholic nun college president saying she was a realist, and I was an idealist, and it was just like, I lived in because of that, in slightly maybe a fantasy world. It wasn't quite the real world where things actually get done and change and people live. That being an idealist, if that's in fact what I am, was something different. And we didn't talk about it as much later as I wished I had. But I started thinking about the people I've painted. Whether you start with Frederick Douglass or Susan B. Anthony, or I come up with the present, and I'm painting like a man like Paul Chappelle, who you're going to be talking to in a little while. And I thought, what's she talking about? About every real change that has happened in this country that has tried to close the gap between what we say as a country and what we actually do as a country has come about because of idealists, people who care, deeply, love the ideals and have the courage to act to try to make them real. An ideal is an idea that you make real or try to make real, and just that all these people, that's what they're all idealists. Martin Luther King was an idealist, but he had a huge effect because of that on the real world. And, it seems that people who often say, I'm a realist, they've already compromised their strength away. Saying, we're going to accept, the game the way it's being played right now, which is a disaster. So we need these idealists. We need them to be proud of being an idealist and then have the courage to act to make those ideals real, the ones that we all care about, that are the reason why we would, love this country. It's because it's ideas and it's attempts over the 250 years to try to actually live up to its own ideals.
Well, that's exactly my concern. That I really wonder sometimes if the ideals, that were drummed into me as a boy, and that this country has postured about representing, and for many years actively and proudly did represent the highest ideals. I'm not sure that they haven't been murdered. I'm not sure that. Where are our leaders? Why is no one challenging this very sad failed presidency as a primary challenge? Where are the leaders who we can invest, where we can regenerate, resuscitate the best in us?
Yeah.
Why isn't Elizabeth Warren going to challenge Obama in the primary? Where are our leaders? Why are the people running for president so profoundly and heartbreakingly compromised?
Right. That's we've constructed a system which only, at least at this point, has only allowed access to people who are already pawns of the system. And that's what you're describing. I want to get back to that subject in a minute, but I want to come at it a slightly different way. I've also, besides environmentalists as primary subjects recently, I've been painting a series of our contemporary whistleblowers, people like Jesselyn Radick in the Justice Department and Thomas Drake from the National Security Agency. I'm going to be meeting in about 10 days Bonatine Greenhouse in Washington, who was the whistleblower in the Pentagon about no-bid contracts for Halliburton for the Iraq War. Amazing woman. But let me just say something about Thomas Drake. The National Security Agency is many times bigger and more secret than the CIA. It's a huge agency that is, people joke that its initials, NSA, mean no such agency because it's so secretive. It's the NSA which was doing all this illegal wiretapping without warrants, and which was being approved by the Bush administration. Thomas Drake had been working there for many years and was becoming increasingly upset about, he knew about the warrantless wiretapping and the fact of how illegal it was and how it compromised the laws of the country and our democracy. And so he went through all the regular channels to try to expose it. And finally he exposed it to Congress, and then as a whistleblower he gave the story of the corruption and illegality inside the NSA to some reporters at the Baltimore Sun. Well, then, of course, he was indicted. As I was saying before, instead of indicting, the people who were doing the corrupt things in the NSA, we indict the person who comes out and tells the truth. And he was charged under the Espionage Act in 2005 as though this truth teller were a spy, giving, information to the enemy, when he's just telling the American people what's being done in their name, that they're being spied on by their own spy agency without any legal justification. So he probably would have been convicted, but in a couple months right before his trial, and by the way, coming up to this, he lost everything, lost all of his resources, his money, his house, was working in a convenience store after this high-paid job in the NSA. His wife had left him and come back, and it was just huge disruption in the family. He couldn't even afford a lawyer. He had a court-appointed attorney. Jane Mayer wrote a great piece in the New Yorker about his case, exposing what was happening to him. And then 60 Minutes did a long interview with him. It completely changed the situation. The government began to back off. They were afraid of publicity. A lot of times you bring this stuff to light, and you can actually, you get a little glimpse into the darkness that's underneath. But and then the government kept offering easier and easier plea bargains, and finally charged him with a misdemeanor for having a government computer at home, and got no sentence, no fine, just a few hours of public service. I just wanted to read you the quote that I put in his painting from him because it's so similar to what you just said. He said, "As a student of history and politics, I firmly believe that we have reached a breaking point in this country when the government violates and erodes our very privacy and precious freedoms in the name of national security and then hides it behind the convenient label of secrecy. This is not the America I took an oath to support and defend in my career. This is not the America I learned about while growing up in Texas and Vermont. This is not the America we are supposed to be." You are absolutely right. And there's Thomas Drake that has reinforced it. This, where we are is, totally in the other side of the black hole from what we still claim to be. And how we turn this thing inside out again is a big, big question. I mean, one of the answers to that has got to be, that we're not going to immediately change these big systems. We're not going to immediately get the money out of politics that has so distorted the system and made a plutocracy or a corporatocracy of what is we are told is a democracy. That's not going to happen right away, and so what we need to be doing is building models locally of self-sufficiency and sustainability and sound community and local democracy, and working in this the transition town movement to be thinking about how we can solve these problems for ourselves and building models of real democratic community. That's one thing. And of course, but that doesn't solve the big problems. That's not going to change climate change and global warming. Those have to be solved systemically by, major changes in policy, at the top. So it's going to require enormous political action and will by the people, acting all over the world to change these things. And I think that part of the despair that you feel and I feel and so many people feel everywhere is how's that going to happen? How's it going to happen in time? I don't know, but I don't know if we have a choice about, we certainly can't give up. I was with Bill Ayers in Chicago last spring. I was invited to some portraits and a conference at Jane Addams Hull House that was organized by Bill Ayers, and somebody asked him the question about that, about despair. I mean, everybody is feeling that. So many people are feeling that anyway. And he said, if you to be an optimist would be you'd be a lunatic, but to be a pessimist you'd be a lunatic. I mean, nobody can predict what's going to happen here, and so our only option is to keep working and do the best we can. And I agree with that.
Well, you never know. Every day the sun comes up, it's a new day, and someone might be inspired to stand on their hind legs and give a great speech, and somehow it might get out and people might actually hear it.
Yeah, you wonder how that process would work. I mean, because our system is so rigged to with the media and the parties to only accept and give a platform to people with enormous wealth behind them, whether a person could actually have that, so-called populist organization that Obama built, which was we some people thought then, and many people think now, was a phony in a way. I mean, most of his money was not actually coming from, common people's $2 donations. It was coming from Wall Street and the big banks and stuff. But could a person build that kind of populist movement that was separate, that was built outside of the system the way it is now? I don't know. It's certainly what we need. But it would be, because of the major media, if they're excluding you, I guess your medium for a long time would have to be face-to-face and using the internet to get a message out and to try to build support. But it would be an interesting struggle because that's the thing we need. We need somebody some group of people. We should not be looking for a savior here. We need a new community. We need a new system. We need a people with a different set of values who are willing to really fight for it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's doable.
I think it may be, and it's certainly we have to think that it is. And one of the things that, as a person who's very concerned with educating, well, let me actually, in just a few minutes, you're going to have on Paul Chappelle. I mean, can we talk about him for a minute?
Please.
I'm sure he'll tell his own story, but I was invited to bring portraits to Rochester, New York last winter. I was invited by the Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence at the University of Rochester, and they took me out to talk in some schools and meet a number of people. And I don't think at that time I had heard of Paul Chappelle. And right when I was about to leave, one of the people in the Gandhi Institute gave me his first book. Was it The End of War? Will War Ever End? And it's just a slim little book about the size of The Little Prince, and said, read this. Mm-hmm. And I, like a lot of us these days, I've got a stack about a mile high of books and articles that I wish I were reading, so I put it in that stack and didn't read it right away. And then somebody else mentioned him to me, and then about 2 or 3 months ago, somebody came to visit and handed me an interview that he had done with the Sun magazine. And I thought, okay, this is enough warning here. I should be paying attention. Mm-hmm. And so I read the interview and was just amazed at the depth of his thinking mm-hmm. about war and peace, and also his life story, and which he'll probably relate later. Mm-hmm. But this is a fantastic young man. I think he's 31, 32 now. Mm-hmm. He, as an Army captain in Iraq in 2007, started writing this book, Will War Ever End? Mm-hmm. And began to really think as a philosopher about why we are doing these things. And his analysis is now superb. But I wanted to, when I painted his portrait, I was looking at so much of his writing is extremely quotable about issues of war and peace, but in his new book, which hasn't yet come out, which he sent me the manuscript of, it's called Peaceful Revolution, there was a quote which struck me really strongly as being extremely apt for this moment. And let me just read it. It says, "When people in a democracy are not educated in the art of living, to strengthen their conscience, compassion, and ability to question and think critically, they can be easily manipulated by fear and propaganda. A democracy is only as wise as its citizens, and a democracy of ignorant citizens can be as dangerous as a dictatorship." We have become a country that is as dangerous as a dictatorship, mm-hmm. Because we no longer have wise citizens, and that's because it's not because our people are dumb. It's because our educational system doesn't educate for citizenship. It doesn't educate people mm-hmm. to really understand the reasons for why things are happening and what their responsibilities and obligations are to alter those things. And they are easily manipulated. I mean, just look at the wars we're in now and how we were manipulated into those wars. What he's saying has become my mantra, my raison d'etre now as an educator, is to try to build an educational system that actually honors young people, that tells them that that tells them the truth about the situation we're in today, and then gives them role models about how to handle it, what to do about it. Otherwise, we're just condescending we're patronizing our own children and like a Pied Piper leading them to disaster. But anyway, I think you and your listeners will, I know, really enjoy your conversation with him.
Well, he'll be with us in 5 or 6 minutes, so we're looking forward to meeting him. Congratulations to you, coming up on 10 years of this marvelous, marvelous work, specifically Americans Who Tell the Truth. And thanks for coming and talking to us.
Well, thanks, Ken. When I started this, I thought that maybe I'd do this for a year or two, and it's just keeps leading me on to people and organizations and discoveries, and then opportunities like this to spend an hour talking with you, and hopefully with other people out there who, by the way, can get in touch with me through the website AmericansWhoTellTheTruth.org and give me their own suggestions. Most of the people I paint now come from suggestions of other people telling me about interesting people, courageous people, dedicated people fighting for one kind of justice or another somewhere in this country, who I can use then as a role model to teach children.
Can I share something with you pretty extraordinary?
Oh, absolutely.
I found out just a couple of weeks ago. This is a 3-watt radio station here in California, and so far in 2011, the podcasts have been listened to in 101 countries around the world.
Oh my goodness, that is wonderful!
It's mind-boggling, and the last 5 months we're averaging something like 10,000 hour-long listens off the website a month, with no promotion whatsoever.
Yeah, that is exciting. My website, Americans Who Tell the Truth, with also no promotion, no advertising, gets about 500,000 hits a month, and it also is from all over the world. And all schools. It's even the U.S. military is on my site a lot. I can, you probably have a site too where you can see the statistics of who's coming. It's fascinating. There is this great hunger out there for a lot of people to hear something other than what the politicians and the mainstream media are telling them.
Well, we are the media.
We are. We need to be, that's for sure. Well, thank you for what you do.
Yep.
That's none of it. That's the other thing. I just going to have a second just to say something. Anybody who's doing any work at all, in this vein, by themselves it means nothing. It amounts to nothing. It's because each other person, chips in and makes it a little bit more real, by adding their own energy and their own voice and their own ability to connect with people. And, when you invite me to talk and then tell me about what you're doing and get it out to more people, it takes, it makes both of us a lot more real, and it makes it then the possibility of other people using it much more real. And it's that's what, that's one of the things that's so important about in the media, is creating that loop and that engages other people along the way.
Well, an hour ago we had nothing, and now we have an hour-long visit with Rob Shetterly for people all over the world to visit with you and to find your work. And we just slingshot this stuff back, forth, and all around.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken, and give my best to Paul when he comes on.
Absolutely. Take good care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Rob Shetterly,